Hello and welcome back to the DRH Show. In today's episode, we're thrilled to have a dynamic and influential figure in the world of personal development and positive psychology. He's not only a number one best-selling author with an impressive portfolio of 15 books, but he's also an accomplished counselor, executive coach, and an all-faith minister. His journey in empowering others spans various roles, including being an international speaker, radio, TV, and podcast host, as well as a sports psychology coach. His mission is profoundly inspiring to positively impact over 2 million people daily across all facets of life, regardless of their circumstances. David Essel, thank you for joining us today.
Dennis, I have been looking forward to this, and I know that we stumbled the first time, but now we're together and we're going to have a great show.
Yeah, I'm glad you still have the time to do this, and I'm glad that you accepted my invitation. So, David, to kick this off, I understand that in 1990 you were unfortunately deeply affected by untreated clinical depression. So, what made you get the help, and what made you want to help others? I'm quite sure that a lot of people would be interested to hear your story about that.
Yeah, Dennis, it's something that I pray no one else ever goes through. Of course, we know that's somewhat unrealistic because there are individuals that try to take their lives every day. And that's what happened to me in 1990. I had undiagnosed clinical depression. I had undiagnosed generalized anxiety disorder. I had undiagnosed ADD, undiagnosed ADHD. And over the years, I'm 67 years of age, and in the 50s, when my parents would take me to the doctor because I always had anger. I was always filled with anxiety. They couldn't figure it out. And then back in the 50s, the doctors didn't know what to do. And they said, it must be allergies. And as I went through life, Dennis, what I found is that I could cover up my depression, anxiety with alcohol. I could cover it up with workaholism. I could cover it up with positive thinking and not want to look at the fact that I was an alcoholic. Well, in 1990, that all came crashing down when I had a failed suicide attempt. And from that suicide attempt, though, some of the most incredible blessings happened in my life, one of which is I'm here with you today. One of the most amazing things that I'm with you, alive, well, doing what I love to do. The other thing that happened is that it completely turned my focus around for the longest period of time. I had not even known that I was clinically depressed, and I'm a freaking therapist. How does a person who has all of this knowledge and background not know that they're going through clinical depression? How does a person with all this experience not know that they're dealing with generalized anxiety disorder and many other conditions? So in 1990, well, it was actually 1991 when I was fully recovered from the failed attempt, I dedicated the rest of my life to this work that we're talking about now, which will include mental health, depression, anxiety, procrastination, addiction to social media, addiction to nicotine, pot, addiction to political arguing. I mean, the world of addiction goes out of control, and it's all about mental health. So it's a story that I really love to share, because a lot of people think when you reach a certain level of success, you've got it made. You've never had problems before, Dennis. And I've had more problems in my life than I care to admit. But the good news is this. From every challenge that I've gone through, from addiction to mental health challenges, I have grown immensely, and I've learned how to be so much more compassionate to others who are struggling, so much more encouraging, so much more inspiring. And as I mentioned, it turned my life completely around. What I'm doing today, I'm going into a brand new deep spiritual program that'll be 2.5 years long. When I graduate from that, I'll be doing even more work in the world of spirituality. So I can tell you that I feel right now, being on your show, this is one of the ways, Dennis, that we can positively lift up to 2 million people a day. And I appreciate you making space for this interview.
Absolutely. And I'm also grateful for you to, kind of give me the opportunity to have a conversation with you, because this is really a good start, because you talk about your personal experience about depression. But of course, this is not just merely anecdotal and a personal experience. This is prevalent. Just to bring some statistics here, around 40 million people struggle with depression and anxiety every day. And I'm quite sure that you're aware of that, having experienced that yourself. But what I'm interested to hear from you, as someone who experienced depression and also as a therapist yourself, why is it that the number is so massive, and do you think this number will decline or get worse?
Dennis, I'm getting chills running down my back right now because your question is so profoundly important. From a male perspective, we have been conditioned through mass consciousness ever since we're little boys to be tough, to stick it out, to not talk about our problems. This is something that's worldwide. Is it changing? Oh my God, yes. In 1980, when I began my clinical practice, we had 90% of my audience of people that would work with me one-on-one from all over the world were women. 90% in 1980 of my clinical practice were women. In 2024, my clinical practice is exactly split down the middle with 50% men and 50% women, which is unheard of, Dennis. If someone would have said to me in 1980 that, men will start to open up to the world of counseling, to the world of coaching, to the world of spirituality, to heal depression, anxiety, PTSD, procrastination, all these mental health issues, I never would have believed it. But, we have this problem admitting that we have these issues. As a matter of fact, in the United States, basketball, of course, is huge here. And some of the biggest stars in basketball have been coming out on national TV commercials talking about their mental health challenges. And these are men who are real, quote unquote, men in the eyes of society. They're athletes, they're big, they're strong, they're committed to their craft. And they're starting to come out and to break the stigma. Thank you, God, for Simone Biles. A number of years ago in the Olympics, when she dropped out of the Olympics because of mental health issues, she opened up a doorway for more conversation. So to answer your question, Dennis, it's a combination of things. We're trained not to be depressed as men, not to be anxious as men. You're a sissy if you're anxious. Get over it. Have a couple beers, get over it, type of a thing. But it's changing. For women, it's a little different, depression, et cetera. One of the causes of depression is submerged emotions like anger. And women will often come into the office and they'll be struggling with deep depression. And I'll say, do you know what the cause of it is? And most people say genetics, right? Even though that's as far from the truth as it can be. What we found with studies is only about 10% of individuals who have depression have the exact genes lined up in a row in order to actually have depression. They have still not found, Dennis, one massive gene that creates depression. So we know about 90% of people that are struggling with depression, it's not from genetics. Now, they may have been raised in an environment where mom or dad was depressed and they picked that up as a role model. So they became depressed because they saw mom or dad as depressed. That's a really easy way to start the depression model. But the other thing for women especially is submerged anger. When women come into the office with depression, or I'm working with them on Zoom, and I say to them, tell me about some of the emotions you're going through, and then I'll bring up the word anger, and they'll go, oh, no, I never get angry. Now, the reason women say that is that an angry woman in the world is called a bitch, if I can use that word. That's what an angry woman is. An angry man is called an angry man. So women have been conditioned to stuff their anger. And you stuff your anger long enough, and it's going to turn into some other type of mental health manifestation, more than likely depression.
Well, you raised some interesting points there. You mentioned about the role of the potential role of genetics, and also stigma in relation to men being a bit hesitant to seek mental health support. And people try to self-medicate through a variety of addictions. So what can you say to them?
Yeah, well, oh my gosh, think about this, Dennis. Alcohol is a depressant. So the worst thing in the world for someone struggling with depression to do is to drink alcohol. And that's what I did, because the initial reaction of alcohol is to calm the body and mind. The initial drink or two, it'll wipe the depression away completely. You'll feel fine. Everything's okay. And then, of course, most of us go on to the third, fourth, fifth, sixth drink. And then the next day we wake up and the depression is deeper. And you do that for 30 years. And that's how you get to a point of suicidal ideation or even the attempt of suicide. So the number one thing we have to do when it comes to depression is that we have to work with professionals. Listen, if I couldn't heal myself, I mentioned this earlier, Dennis, of all of these, I couldn't heal myself by myself of my addiction, depression, anxiety, et cetera. I had to get professional help. I'm reaching out to other therapists saying, hey, could you barter with me? Do you want to work together? I can help you with your marriage if you'll help me with this. And that's the beginning of healing, is reaching out and being open and honest that something is wrong. I've lost joy in the normal things that I used to do. I used to go out with my friends. Now I more isolate. I never really drank that much or smoked that much pot or smoked nicotine that much. I never really ate that much. Oh my God, food is a huge substance abuse in regards to people dealing with depression. And why is that? Salt, white flour, fat, and sugar actually go to the pleasure center of the brain, very similar to alcohol, to numb the emotions we don't want to feel. So if you're in the evening sitting in front of the television set and you're depressed, there's a darn good chance you're going to start eating salt, sugar, white flour, or fat, or a product that has all of them in the same thing, because that will actually nullify that emotion of boredom or anger or depression or anxiety for a period of time. But once the sugar wears off, once the alcohol wears off, once the pot wears off, once the nicotine wears off, we're stuck with a deeper and deeper and deeper feeling of depression, anxiety, etc.
So following those examples that you mentioned, David, would you say that all addictions are mental health issues? You mentioned something about, lack of control, lack of restraint. So are they all mental health issues?
Oh, Dennis, you're nailing it left and right, my brother. Every addiction is created by some type of emotional abnormality, by some type of emotion we don't want to deal with, peer pressure. How many of us have started out in a world of addiction because people, and that's how I started at 12. I wanted to hang out with the 16-year-old guys. And I had mentioned, I had a real problem as a young kid with anger and irritability. And I found that, when I went to these kids and said, hey, I want to be part of this group, they said, well, you're going to have to drink this warm 16-ounce Budweiser beer. I did. And in a matter of minutes, I felt better. I wasn't angry. But every addiction in the world has an emotional starting point. It's not a genetic starting point. And, this is a very important point. Too many professionals that do the work that I do continue to blame genetics for our alcoholism. Genetics has nothing to do with the creation of alcoholism. Genetics has nothing to do with the foundational start of alcoholism. A gene, and I have it in my family. There is a gene for addiction and alcohol. There is a gene for alcoholism. My brother has it. I have it. We have an aunt that died of it. It is clearly throughout our whole family. But that gene did not make me drink that warm 16-ounce Budweiser. That gene does not drive us into a bar. That gene does not open the bottle of wine at night and start pouring it. We make the choice. Then, if we make the choice because of peer pressure, boredom, anger, anxiety, financial insecurity, relationship issues, whatever it is, we make that choice to drink. And if we have the gene can get tripped on, and that's where alcoholism begins.
Absolutely. And I think one thing to realize here is that it may sound cliche, but the key here is really to achieve balance. And I understand, David, that in your practice, you employ various healing techniques. And so could you share some of the most effective methods that individuals can adopt, especially in relation to addiction?
Yeah, the first thing we have people do, Dennis, is they write their addiction story. And this is crucial. When it began, why it began, who it began with, what emotions were we running away from? Were we angry at our parents? Were we angry at a partner? Like, we start with the addiction story, because when people write down everything from the day they started their addiction to today. Now, as a matter of fact, there are some people that write 3- and 4-page letters of addiction, their addiction story. And I got one the other day. It was a 45-page letter. This guy had started out at 15. He was 70 years of age. He had 45 pages of writing his addiction story, how it continued, why it bumped up, why he started drinking more. And, one time it was because he was in college and he wasn't going to pass an incredibly important major. Another time, him and his wife, when they first got married, all they had was arguing, going on and on and on. So we can look back at this addiction story, and for the person who's struggling with addiction to see how they elevated their use, it's incredibly important to have a logical understanding of how it began, and then to see it through the lifetime, how it consistently stayed with us. So that's one incredibly important tool. The second tool is going to be self-care. Now, this is going to sound soft and this is going to sound easy. It's not at all. So in the morning, we have our individuals that are struggling with addiction. When they get up, they don't turn on their iPhone. They don't turn the TV on. They don't turn the radio on. They don't go to their iPad. They don't go to a computer. There's no electronics in the beginning for at least 30 minutes, and then we expand that for an hour. Why is that? How you start your day, whether you're an addict or not, is going to have a huge impact on how your day goes forward. So if we have people, which most of us do, jump up, pull over our iPhone when we wake up, see what messages we got, our people in our program don't do that anymore. We try to keep them down on screen time because that can be a relapse indicator. You know, when people are on social media and they're getting frustrated, they're seeing comments about politics or comments about the vaccine, and they're getting all frustrated. That is a great opportunity to relapse. So we say the first 30 minutes, let's have it be reading, journaling, prayer, meditation. Now this, again, I'm going to say this again, Dennis, this may sound like all soft tools, but it's tools to redirect the brain. Now I point back here, this is the subconscious mind, this is the conscious mind. So consciously we wake up every day and we say, I am going to make this the best day of my life. I'm going to do everything in my power to stay sober. Then we feed the subconscious mind by journaling that same statement. Today is another day of sobriety. We have people highly involved in their program, Dennis. I don't want them relying on me and becoming codependent, that I'm going to do all the work for them. And then when they stop working with me, they go back and relapse. We create a brand new lifestyle for them. And the longer we work together, the more tools we put into play so people can stay sober for life.
Mm-hmm. And of course, David, you mentioned these tools that you use to help people, the self-care, the addiction story. But it's not just those that you really focus on, because you also help people using amino acid therapy. And I understand that, you know, it has its own particular purpose and it's effective. So if you could just kind of like educate us about amino acid therapy and how it can help, especially people who are struggling with ADHD.
Yeah, you know, when we look at the brain and addiction, the brain just becomes hijacked, Dennis. You know, it starts to be scrambled. Like I give, when I'm trying to explain what happens in the addict's brain versus the non-addict's brain. If this is the addict's brain, that is going in circles, constant circles. You know, do I have enough for tonight? Do I want to get high tonight? Do I have enough to drink? Should I stop after work and get a drink? It's constantly thinking. The non-addict's brain, due to, well, I'll talk about more in a minute, amino acid therapy, meditation, breathing techniques, exercise, correct eating, all that kind of stuff. The non-addict's brain is calm compared to the craziness here. So we want to get over here. So some of the amino acids that can be utilized to calm the addict's brain, number one is tryptophan. Tryptophan is absolutely phenomenal. It does slow down the thinking process. So what we normally do is we have people take a 500 milligram capsule. Now check with your doctor before you take anything if you're on any medication whatsoever. But Dennis, will have them take a 500 milligram capsule of tryptophan before they leave the office. If their drive is a half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, by the time they get home, their brain has calmed down. Now, for someone who's struggling with addiction and low mental attitude, or maybe even a low level of depression, we'll use a different amino acid called DLPA. D as in David, L as in Larry, P as in Peter, A as in Apple. DLPA is a dopamine booster. Now, we all know dopamine is one of the most powerful feel-good chemicals or neurotransmitters in the brain. So by taking DLPA, we're actually lifting our mood, versus antidepressants, which do the opposite. Antidepressants lower your depressed mood. Now, they don't help heal the depression. They just numb it. DLPA will actually lift your spirits, lift your mood, so you start to feel better. And as you start to feel better, you're probably going to have a less desire for the cravings for your addiction. And then the last one I'll talk about, which is very well known all over the world in regards to calming the addict's brain, is CBD, the non-psychoactive ingredient of marijuana. There's no THC in it. It's pure CBD. Now, you have to get it from a really great source. But when you get CBD, and I didn't believe that it was going to be this powerful, Dennis, and I use it myself. 5 years ago, one of my best friends, Dr. Nick Patera, who's huge in the United States in the world of addiction and recovery, he had, even though I've been sober for years, I still had struggled from time to time with anxiety. And he had recommended CBD. And I said, Doc, it has no psychoactive ingredient. He said, you're going to be blown away. It doesn't need any. And Dennis, he was right. I take a dropper of CBD before I leave the office. By the time I get home, my mind is calm. So we have all kinds of options to help people go from this frenetic, crazy brain out of control, a hijacked brain. Oh my God, we haven't even talked about porn addiction. One of the most difficult addictions is porn addiction that completely hijacks the brain. The great news is, no matter what addiction you're facing, no matter how deep it is, no matter how long it is that's been going on, we can help you heal, and it's guaranteed. Our work is guaranteed.
But also, it has to be said that aside from the technique, self-care, addiction story, and amino acid therapy, that they're really important. But you touched upon an important issue earlier. You mentioned Simone Biles, and I think she's really a good role model when it comes to, encouraging people to talk about their mental health. But from your experience, how do you think we can get more mental health support for people who are affected? Because, all of these are good, but without mental health support, we can't really manage our own mental health.
Yeah, Dennis, it's a challenge all over the world, isn't it? If you go to the United States and you look around for any type of program on mental health, you're going to have a hard time finding one. Working with a professional, if you can afford it, is the number one way to go. And then the second thing to do, if you cannot afford working with a professional, would be to go online and start Googling information for yourself. How does one overcome depression? How does one know if they are depressed? What are supplementations that people can take in order to minimize their depression? So we're going to have to become our own researchers. If we can't afford to go and work with a professional, we're going to have to do the research on our own. Now, the other thing you're going to need, because research on your own will never be enough, the other thing we're going to have is going to be an accountability partner. Now, I don't recommend a family member. I don't recommend a best friend. I recommend someone who's a friend, who understands that you're struggling with addiction and is willing to text you every day, hold your feet to the fire, even though they're not a professional. If you are responsible to reach out to someone and say, hey, I've got another day of sobriety, they can encourage you. Thumbs up back is all they have to do. But we need other people to help us heal, Dennis. Addiction and depression and anxiety is not something that any of us, even professionals, can usually heal on our own. We've got to reach out. Now, there are some church organizations, there are some spiritual organizations that offer incredibly low sliding scale fees for counseling. That would be another option as well.
And of course, we can also borrow from other fields, because you mentioned earlier, David, that you were an athlete and a coach. So would you mind sharing what we can learn from sports in terms of improving our lives, just managing our mental health and having a balanced lifestyle?
Well, one of the greatest things about any physical activity is the release of dopamine, serotonin, and GABA, three of the most powerful neurotransmitters in the body. And through athletics, the brain is constantly being releasing the dopamine, the serotonin, the feel-good chemicals that we all need to stay sober. So, whether someone does a weekend exercise of tennis or plays 5 days a week or is in the gym 5 days a week or walk in the neighborhood 5 days a week, we can learn from athletes. Now, the one thing that's interesting, though, physical activity by itself will not stop addiction or stop depression because, as I mentioned earlier, we have some of the greatest stars in America's sports that are on TV talking about how they overcame addiction, how they overcame their depression, how they overcame anxiety. And all of these athletes say the same thing you and I were talking about a minute ago. They couldn't do it on their own. But the fact that they are role models, we can look up to these athletes and go, thank God. One of my favorite athletes just admitted he had been an alcoholic for 10 years and now he's sober. These are the type of stories that athletes can help us move forward in the world of recovery from depression, addiction, etc. But you'll also notice something very interesting, at least I do when I work with professional athletes. Almost all of them are struggling with some type of addiction in their minds, Dennis, whether it's video game addiction, social media addiction, alcohol, pot. A lot of our athletes are really struggling. So just because they're making $20 million a year, it doesn't mean that they're not prone to depression and addiction. But the more of them that come out and mention that they have struggled and that they are getting better, the better it is for the world.
You mentioned something important earlier about the role of social media, and I'm particularly interested with resilience, how we can promote resilience to especially to young people. So I was wondering if you could share to us some strategies when it comes to promoting psychological resilience in the digital age.
Well, number one that we say to everyone, when you're on social media, never, ever argue.
Mhm.
I don't care how correct you are and how wrong the person has a post is. And I've got a great story for you. There was an individual that went through my certification to become a life coach, a mental health life coach. Now, before he became a mental health life coach, he was an attorney and he was on Twitter all the time, is arguing with people. Like he knew everything and everyone else was wrong. It's very typical on social media. What that does is when we are arguing constantly and we think we're right, we are actually decreasing our self-confidence, because someone who is really confident in life will make a statement once, and if people don't agree with them, they'll let it go. They don't have to defend themselves. They don't have to argue or at all. So this client of mine comes to me and I ask him why he wants to be a certified life coach. He says, he's always had this great desire to help people at a higher level. And I said, are you on social media? Have you had challenges on social media? And there was this long pause. And he said, yes. He said, as a matter of fact, just last week, even though we started the program together, I was on Twitter arguing with this woman who I argue with every day. And she found out I was in a certification to become a life coach. And this is what got me off Twitter. After one of my arguing statements, she put down, she goes, oh, this is impressive. You're training to become a mental health life coach and you argue with me every day on Twitter. Doesn't sound like you're following your words, does it? That statement right there caught his attention on how addicted he had become to arguing on social media. Thank God, overnight, he was able to change it. But we've got to watch our involvement in social media. It's so easy to think we're right and everyone else is wrong, when in actuality, no one really cares about your opinion if you want the truth.
And of course, aside from that, David, you also host your own podcast, and I understand you also talk about victim mentality. So this is really an important issue. So how do you think mental health can make someone feel like life isn't fair for them? So can you talk more about this victim mentality and also in relation to resilience?
Yeah, so many of us refuse to take responsibility for anything that goes wrong in our life, right? We're overweight because of our parents. We don't have the money that we want because our partner spends it all. We're not in the position we want because we're doing what our parents wanted us to do, not what I want to do. I mean, oh my God, the victimhood stuff. And genetics is a really easy tool to use as an excuse for not wanting to do the work to change your life. So to get out of victimhood and become more resilient, the number one thing we have to do is become honest with ourselves, which is the hardest thing in the world. I say to all victims, until you stop blaming the world for the situation you're in, the situation you're in is never going to change. The minute you take responsibility, even 25%, for how you got overweight, how you got addicted, why you're in financial struggle, why you don't have a relationship, why your relationship is a piece of crap. The minute you start to take responsibility, you shatter victimhood, Dennis. And when we shatter victimhood, we can then tap into this amazing gift called life that's been sitting inside us all along, just waiting for the chance to come to the surface.
And of course, when we talk about victimhood, I think another thing that we have to mention here is that it has become a sort of valuable currency, because we now live in society, especially in the Western society, that you're kind of being encouraged to, use your victimhood status to get on in life.
Yeah.
But of course, developing resilience is really an important tool. But you also talk on your podcast that we also have to be a number one cheerleader. And I think that is really a powerful kind of mindset. But how do we develop this, kind of self-love, being a number one cheerleader?
Yeah, Dennis, these are all exceptional questions you're asking. There's very few people in the world that I know that truly love themselves. And I mean that. Very few of us love ourselves. All we have to do is look at our actions on a daily basis. If the body is the temple, if the mind is the temple, and we're eating crap food, we're not loving ourselves. If we're watching and listening to all this conspiracy theory nonsense or all this political crap all over the world, we're not loving ourselves. We have to learn how to slow down and make better choices with what we watch, what we listen to, what we read, and who we hang out with. This is all related to resilience, positive attitude, freedom from addiction, high self-confidence, high self-worth. But too many of us get sucked into the mass consciousness of, well, I better keep up with it. As a matter of fact, I got to tell you this, Dennis, because this was one of the most disgusting things a podcast host ever said to me not too long ago. And I don't mind repeating it. He asked me he said, but you're telling us not to watch the political news. I said, you're right. I said, I haven't watched news since prior to COVID, and I don't plan on probably ever going back to it. He said, well, how do you know what's going on politically? I said, I can find out what's going on politically in a heartbeat. I can ask a friend here, a friend there, two opposing opinions. One's a Republican, one's a Democrat. I'll find out everything I need to know. He said, so you don't watch the political news? I said, no. Then he said, David Essel, you're not a patriot of the United States of America.
I also don't watch the news, and not regularly, but I think the reason why I try to stay away from the news is I tell my partner that if it's really that big and it's going to affect it, I'll know it.
That's right.
I don't have to keep being regularly updated about it. If this like if Putin is going to attack Britain, I'll know it.
Yes,
I don't have to have a continuous, barrage of news. But yeah, that's a good point.
And Dennis, one thing too that a lot of people don't understand is that news program directors, news directors, they use MRI studies to find out what images, what words will constantly bring a person back to be addicted to see the next round of news. This is not just some kind of throwing stories out there. There's throwing stories out there that have been studied greatly through MRI imaging, just like cigarette companies do the same thing. They'll find, and through MRI imaging, they'll see what lights up the dopamine in the brain the fastest, and they'll add that ingredient to the cigarette. Television stations do the same thing. Listen, news is based on sensationalism. If it's not sensational, you're not going to get the ad rate. News is based on money. It's not based on being real or being honest or giving a crap about your citizens. It's based on advertising revenue. So when the average American hears these facts I just said, or the average individual in England or India or Japan, it should really make us stop and look and say, why am I watching this stuff that's been programmed to make me addicted to this network, to this host, to this whatever? We need to question ourselves. And then when you move away from media, be ready for withdrawal. Be ready for the cravings to start. They're going to last 7 to 14 days. Work through them, and you'll be absolutely free from the insanity that's going on in the world that you can't do anything about. So why put your emotions into it?
Absolutely. You have some wonderful insights, and I'm sure that people can learn more by listening to your podcast. But let's talk about your book, David. I understand in one of the chapters in your book, you talk about how important gratitude is, but you also say that it's difficult to live in a state of gratitude. Why is that so?
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, we're being bombarded, Dennis, every day with something on television, social media that's negative. Maybe we hang out with friends that are negative. We hang out with conspiracy theorists that are negative. So it's hard to have a state of gratitude. And that's what I'm going to go back to. What do we watch? What do we listen to? What we read, and who we hang out with? If those 4 factors are lined up in our favor, we can live in a high state of gratitude. One of the things that, and this is from the world of Buddhism, that is such an incredible teaching vehicle. One of the things that Buddhists always say is do not ever get attached to the end result of whatever you're going after. Don't get attached to winning the race. Rehearse, practice, work your butt off, but don't get attached to life turning out the way you think it should. It's one of the greatest ways to be disappointed. Work really hard, but let go of the end result. Work your tail off to make more money, to have a better relationship, to have a better body and everything else. But let go of it happening on the timeline you think it should, because most of the time it's not going to happen as quickly as you'd like.
That's an interesting take, David. And also another thing that you talk about is the law of attraction. So you even wrote a book about it, David. So could you share your ideas about law of attraction?
Oh my gosh. I hate to say this, Dennis, but one of the most disgusting programs that has ever been created in the United States of America that I used to teach from 1980 to 1996 is the law of attraction. Of course, it was followed up with that ridiculous book, The Secret, that sold 7 billion copies or whatever. But, it's all a bunch of nonsense. Dennis, listen, If all we had to do was put positive thoughts out into this universe, I don't know what the universe is. Is it God? Is it Goddess? Is it whatever the hell the universe is? But we're putting thoughts out into the universe. And according to the law of attraction, according to The Secret, whatever you put out there must return in kind. So you want a Maserati. Well, did it show up in your driveway? Probably not, because it's not a fact that you can just put a thought out there. The other thing, Dennis, you and I wouldn't have jobs. If the law of attraction and The Secret was real, there would be no need for doctors, because all we would do is say, I'm in perfect health, and bingo. There'd be no need for financial planners, because all we'd have to say is, I earn $1 million this week, and it would come. There'd be no need for anything. There'd be no books that would ever be needed. So obviously, just these points I'm making prove that they're both pretty ridiculous. Now, is there some sense of truth in the law of attraction? Is there like a smidget of truth? Yes, but not the way they teach it. The smidget of truth is if you hang around with really optimistic, high-achieving people, and you do everything they do. You get up at 4 a.m., you're in the gym at 5, you're reading spiritual books from 7 to 8, you're eating an incredibly healthy breakfast, blah, 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 blah. You might reach their level, but there's no guarantee. So we have to really look at this world more realistically. You know, the law of attraction states whatever you think comes into a reality. And that's not true. I mean, maybe you can disagree with me, Dennis. Maybe whatever you think of automatically pops into your life. And if you can do that, that's called a miracle. And you're working very closely with Jesus Christ, and good for you. But besides being Jesus Christ, I think it's really hard just to think a thought and have your life instantly changed, as the law of attraction and The Secret have said for years. As a matter of fact, here's something, an interesting story. So I wrote a book called Positive Thinking Will Never Change Your Life, but this book will. I had written books for 20 years, Dennis, without ever getting close to a #1 bestseller. When I put this book out about 7 or 8 years ago, Positive Thinking Will Never Change Your Life, but this book will, all of the people that I work with said, David, one of two things is going to happen. It's either going to go #1 bestseller, or you're going to be working sweeping the streets, because no one's going to want to have anything to do with you. Well, there's a very famous radio TV host in America. Her name is Jenny McCarthy. Jenny McCarthy took a shot and had me on her show. She didn't believe in my book. She loved the law of attraction. She loved The Secret. She didn't think my book was the book for her. She had been telling her listeners for years that if you think positively, positive things will happen. So I come on her show, and she's a sweetheart. Oh my God, she's so smart, so gorgeous, so funny, a great radio host. She looks at me and she gives me this big smile. She said, David Essel, I know you have this book, Positive Thinking Will Never Change Your Life. You know, I've been telling my audience for years, if you think positively, everything will work out great. You have 3 minutes to convince me that you're correct and I'm incorrect. Go. And Dennis, in that 3 minutes, I did it. At the end of the 3 minutes, she holds up her hand and she says, David, stop. She leans into the mic and she goes, ladies and gentlemen, I have been wrong. The guy you're listening to, David Essel, is the new leader of the positive thinking movement. And the whole premise of our work, Dennis, is that 20% of your thinking to become successful is crucial. But what's even more important, are you willing to do the action steps that most people won't do? That's the difference between super successful people and people that wish they were.
Absolutely. We won't have, like successful figures like Elon Musk, like if they just keep on thinking about, law of attraction. Or actually, I think Elon Musk at one point tweeted something similar to what you're saying. We can't just keep on thinking about, attracting something positive, but we have to work on it. But you mentioned that you are a mental health professional and you're a master life coach. So you have certifications about this. So some people might be interested to get in touch with you, to work with you one-on-one. So what's the best way to get in touch with you, David?
Yeah, Dennis, it's so easy. The name of my website is what I do all day long. It's called talkdavid.com. So all you have to do is remember, this is all this guy does is talk, and he named his website talkdavid.com. DavidEssel.com also goes to the same site, but it's usually easier to remember talkdavid.com. And at talkdavid.com, listen, Dennis, we are such a believer in helping this world to heal. We give away 5 of our books absolutely free at talkdavid.com. We have over 400 free blogs at talkdavid.com. You can access my YouTube channel with 2,600 free videos on personal growth at talkdavid.com. And if you want to work with me one-on-one from all over the world. We just entered, Dennis, our 45th year of counseling. I just can't even believe it's gone that fast. 45 years of counseling. We work with people from all over the world. I've got a client in London right now, as a matter of fact, Africa, you name it. We're all over the place. So if people want to work with me, any goal, any challenge whatsoever, anything in the world other than politics, go to talkdavid.com. We will create a program, get together, and help you change your life forever.
Absolutely. Well, if you want politics, you just go to X or YouTube. I'm sure you can find that. If you want to talk about mental health and improving yourself, I'll put all the links to David's website. Now, David, this is really an interesting conversation, but we're already approaching towards the end of this conversation, and I'd like to have an opportunity to get to know you more as a person. So I prepared quick fire questions with you, some lighthearted questions.
Okay.
So the first one is, what were you afraid of as a child?
Wow, what was I afraid of a child? Failing in basketball. Believe it or not, starting at the age of 6, my life was consumed by the sport of basketball. And so there was always a concern, of course I wanted to make it to the pros. I never did. But then there was a concern, would I be a star in high school? Would I be able to play Division I college basketball? And I accomplished both of those goals. But that was probably one of my insecurities as a child, is would I be able to do my favorite thing in the world for the rest of my life? Now, I haven't been able to do that as a professional from the court side, but I've been able to do it by helping athletes. So that fear was unfounded, Dennis. I found a way around it.
And what is your favorite word in another language?
My favorite, hamsa.
Which means
I am that. Mm-hmm. I am the divine. And it comes from Hinduism. One of my favorite words ever, hamsa, Hamsa. And it's all of us, Dennis. It's not just me. But everyone, if you want to believe it, has the divine within them. So every morning when I wake up, I go through my Hamsa repetitions, and it really does help me.
And if you hadn't been a counselor, what would you have pursued in your life?
Probably a basketball coach. I probably would have went full-time into the world of basketball and become a basketball coach. It still is a love of my life. I watch games every night on TV. I give my opinion to the referees and TV, but they don't seem to listen to me very much, Dennis.
And finally, the floor is all yours. What should people take away from today's conversation?
The most important thing is that you can change where you are if you truly want to. Nothing is permanent in life. There's no addiction that's permanent. There's no grief for the loss of a loved one. I lost my mom and dad 3 years ago and 2 years ago. And while my grief is still there, it's not permanent. It's decreased by 90% because I work it every day. I talk to my mom and dad every day. They talk back to me in a very different way. But nothing is permanent in life. The situation you're in right now that might be challenging relationship-wise, it's not permanent. The financial challenges you have right now aren't permanent. If you make up your mind to get the help and do the work, there's nothing impermanent. And why is that so important? Because so many of us, when we go through life, we start to believe this is the best it's going to be. It'll never be better than that. I can tell you, after being an addict for 30 years, it's not permanent. I've been clean for 30 years, and the most beautiful 30 years of my life. Please never give up on yourself. You are too important to let yourself go.
Mm-hmm. Lovely message, David. Now, as we navigate these complex times, your expertise and insights are really invaluable. David Essel, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us here on the DRH show, and I look forward to hearing more about your work.
Dennis, I have had a blast. Your questions were phenomenal, and if I can ever help you again, I would love to.
Thank you.